There is a silent power working within you right now, not outside of you, not in some distant place you have to travel to reach, not locked away behind years of study or hidden in rituals only a select few understand. It is already inside you. It has always been inside you. And the moment you truly grasp what that means, not intellectually, not as an idea you nod at and move on from, but deeply, personally, in a way that shifts something fundamental in how you see yourself, everything changes. Joseph Murphy spent decades studying this truth. He studied the ancient wisdom texts, the sacred teachings of East and West, the emerging science of the mind, and what he found again and again, across cultures and centuries and traditions, was the same conclusion: the power to heal, the power to transform, the power to move from suffering to wholeness. It lives inside the human being. It was placed there by something greater than us, and most people go their entire lives never once accessing it, never once realizing it was there, searching everywhere outside themselves for what was already waiting within. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic language designed to make you feel good for a few minutes before you go back to your normal life. This is a description of how you are actually built. This is the architecture of the human mind and body as Murphy understood it, and as an increasing body of science is now beginning to confirm. So let us begin at the beginning. Let us talk about what this power actually is, where it lives, how it operates, and most importantly, how you can work with it starting today. The first thing you need to understand is the nature of your own mind. Most people walk around believing they are their conscious thoughts, the voice in your head, the opinions you hold, the decisions you make, the things you tell yourself when you look in the mirror. That, most people assume, is who they are. But Joseph Murphy was very clear on this point. That voice, those conscious thoughts, are only a small fraction of what you actually are. Beneath that surface awareness lies something vast, something ancient, something incomprehensibly powerful. Murphy called it the subconscious mind. Others have called it the deeper mind, the inner mind, the subjective mind. The name matters less than the understanding. What matters is this: your subconscious mind is not passive. It is not just a storage system for old memories and forgotten dreams. It is the operating system of your entire being. Every heartbeat, every breath, every function of every organ in your body, every process of repair and renewal happening right now as you sit and listen. All of it is being directed, orchestrated, and sustained by your subconscious mind. And here is where it gets extraordinary. Here is where Murphy's teaching steps beyond ordinary self-help and into something that deserves to be called wisdom. Your subconscious mind is not separate from the intelligence that created you. When Murphy spoke about the God-given healing power, he was speaking about this, that the same infinite intelligence which formed your body from a single cell, which knew how to build your heart and your lungs and your nervous system without any instruction from your conscious mind, that intelligence did not leave when you were born. It stayed, it remains inside you. It is still active. It is still capable of the same miraculous work it did in the beginning. Murphy would say it this way: your subconscious mind is in contact with infinite life, infinite intelligence, infinite supply. It doesn't know limitation the way your conscious mind does. It doesn't believe in impossibility. It doesn't get tired or discouraged or overwhelmed. It simply responds to the impressions you give it, works continuously to manifest those impressions in your physical reality, and never once stops. The question is never whether the power is there. The power is always there. The question is what you are doing with it. Now let us talk about the body, because this is where Murphy's teaching becomes not just philosophical, but deeply practical. He was fascinated by what we might today call the mind-body connection, though he understood it long before that phrase became fashionable. He understood that the body is not a machine separate from the mind. It is an expression of the mind. It is the mind made visible, made physical, made tangible. Every thought you think produces a biological response. Every emotion you feel sends signals through your nervous system that affect your organs, your blood chemistry, your immune function, your capacity for repair. This is not speculation anymore. Modern research in the fields of psychoneuroimmunology, a term that simply means the connection between thought, nerve, and immune response, has demonstrated conclusively that the state of your mind has direct, measurable consequences for the health of your body. But Murphy understood this experientially decades before the research arrived to confirm it. He had seen it too many times to dismiss. He had worked with too many people, received too many letters, heard too many accounts of what happened when someone genuinely changed the impressions they were feeding their subconscious mind. Bodies that had been sick became well. Conditions that had been chronic and persistent cleared. Pain that had been constant diminished. Not in every case. Not like a magic formula where results are guaranteed on demand, but with a consistency and a pattern that could not be explained away as coincidence. What Murphy observed was this: when a person holds an image of wholeness in their mind with genuine feeling and genuine belief, something in the body responds. The inner intelligence that governs biological function begins to move in the direction of that image. Repair processes that may have been sluggish or blocked begin to flow. Energy that was tied up in fear and anxiety and resistance is released for healing work. The body, quite simply, begins to do what it was designed to do: restore, regenerate, renew. Because this is one of the most misunderstood aspects of the healing process. People often think that healing is something unusual, something that requires extraordinary intervention from outside. But the body heals constantly, automatically, without any conscious effort from you. If you cut your finger, you do not sit down and figure out how to grow new skin. You do not consciously direct the platelets to cluster or the fibroblasts to rebuild tissue. It just happens. The intelligence inside you takes over and handles it completely. And Murphy's insight was that this same intelligence, this same automatic, brilliant, tireless healing capacity is capable of addressing far more than a cut finger. It is capable of addressing conditions that medicine sometimes finds baffling, because it operates at a level deeper than anything medicine currently reaches. So the question that naturally follows is, if this power is always there, why are people sick? Why do people suffer? Why doesn't the healing just happen automatically for everything? This is perhaps the most important question in all of Murphy's teaching. And his answer was not a simple one, but it was a consistent one. The healing doesn't happen, or it is blocked, or it is reversed, because of what the person is habitually feeding their subconscious mind. Remember, the subconscious does not evaluate. It does not weigh evidence and decide what is true. It accepts. It takes what you give it through your habitual thoughts, your repeated emotions, your deeply held beliefs, and it works to manifest those things in your physical experience. This is not a punishment. This is not the universe being cruel. This is simply how the system works. It is designed to bring your inner world into outer expression, and for most people, what lives in their inner world is not images of health and wholeness. What lives there is fear, anxiety, the memory of past illness and the anticipation of future illness, the deeply embedded belief, often absorbed from childhood or from culture or from a medical diagnosis spoken in an authoritative voice, that something is wrong with them, that they are broken, that their body cannot be trusted, that suffering is their inheritance. These impressions, held habitually, given emotional intensity, repeated day after day in thought and word and attention, become the instructions that the subconscious mind follows. Not because you chose them consciously, not because you wanted to be sick, but because this is how the deeper mind works. It does not distinguish between what you want and what you fear. It does not hear the difference between a prayer and a worry. It reads the emotional intensity, the repetition, the depth of belief, and it gets to work. Murphy was not blaming sick people for being sick. He was incredibly compassionate about this. He knew that most people had no idea this was happening. They were suffering genuinely, and they had simply never been taught how their own mind operated. His mission, the reason he wrote and spoke with such passion and urgency, was to give people the knowledge they needed to stop inadvertently working against themselves and to begin working with the extraordinary healing intelligence that was already inside them. Let us talk about how you actually do this, because knowledge without application is just information. And Murphy was always more interested in results than in ideas. The gateway to the subconscious mind is feeling, not positive thinking in the shallow sense that phrase has come to mean, not plastering a smile on your face while your stomach is knotted with anxiety. Real feeling, the genuine emotional state that arises when you truly accept something as real and true in your inner experience. Murphy taught a practice he called the scientific prayer, though others have called it by different names: visualization, affirmative prayer, mental treatment, directed imagination. The mechanics are essentially this. You take the condition you wish to change, the illness, the pain, the limitation in your body, and rather than rehearsing it, rather than dwelling on its symptoms and its history and your fear of its future, you deliberately create in your mind a vivid, sensory, emotionally real experience of the opposite, of health, of wholeness, of your body functioning exactly as it was designed to function. You see yourself well. You feel yourself well. You give that inner vision the emotional texture of gratitude, of relief, of joy, the feelings you would naturally have if the healing had already occurred. And you do this repeatedly with real focus, with real intention, ideally in the deeply relaxed state, just before sleep, when the barrier between conscious and subconscious mind is naturally thinner and the impressions you plant sink more deeply. Murphy wrote extensively about the power of the drowsy state, that twilight between waking and sleeping. He considered it one of the most powerful windows for reaching the subconscious mind. The critical faculty of the conscious mind, which normally acts as a kind of gatekeeper, evaluating and questioning and doubting everything, becomes quiet in that state, and what you plant in those moments has unusual power to take root. This is not self-deception. This is not pretending that your symptoms aren't real. Your symptoms are real. Murphy never asked anyone to deny physical reality. What he was asking you to do was recognize that physical reality is downstream from mental reality, that the body follows the mind. And therefore, if you want to change the body, you must first change the dominant impression held in the mind. You must give the subconscious a new image to work toward, a new instruction to follow, a new pattern to manifest. There is another element that Murphy considered absolutely essential, and it is one that modern spiritual teachers often underemphasize because it is less comfortable to talk about. It is the matter of belief, not belief as performance, not saying the right words while secretly doubting them. Real belief, the kind that has settled into your nervous system and become part of how you experience reality. Murphy understood that you can do all the visualizations and affirmations in the world, and if underneath them is a bedrock conviction that they won't work, that healing isn't for you, that your condition is permanent, that God doesn't work that way, or any of 100 other deeply held doubts, then the practice will produce little or nothing, because the subconscious reads the deepest impression, and the deepest impression will win. This is why Murphy spent so much time not just giving people techniques, but giving them a new understanding of reality. He wanted to change the soil before planting the seed. He knew that if someone genuinely came to understand, not just intellectually but in their bones, that there is an infinite healing intelligence inside them that has already healed conditions far more severe than theirs, that has operated through people in exactly their circumstances and produced results that medicine could not explain, then the ground of their belief would shift. And once the ground shifts, the seed can take root. Once the belief changes, the technique becomes almost effortless. So let this be the work. Before you even begin the practice, before you sit down to visualize and affirm, ask yourself honestly, what do I actually believe about my body's ability to heal? What do I believe about the intelligence inside me? What do I believe about whether something greater than my conscious mind can and will work on my behalf? If you find doubt there, don't condemn it. Don't pretend it isn't there. Bring it into the light. Look at it directly. And then begin to feed your mind the evidence. Murphy was a great collector of what he called demonstrations, real accounts of real people who had experienced healing through the activation of this inner power. He shared them constantly because he understood that the human mind changes through exposure to evidence. Read the accounts. Study the cases. Let the evidence of what is possible begin to erode the certainty of impossibility that may be living in your deeper mind. This is preparation. This is the real beginning of the work. There is something else Murphy taught that is deeply relevant here, and it has to do with the words you speak. Not just in your formal practice, but all day, every day, in the casual stream of your ordinary conversation and inner monologue. Murphy was very aware of the power of spoken words to deepen impressions in the subconscious mind. Every time you tell someone about your illness with dramatic emphasis, every time you describe yourself as someone who is always sick, every time you say things like, my arthritis, my anxiety, my bad back, with that possessive, claiming language, you are reinforcing the impression in your subconscious. You are, without meaning to, instructing the deeper mind to continue producing that condition because you are identifying it as yours, as part of you, as a permanent feature of your reality. This does not mean you should lie to people or refuse to acknowledge practical realities. You can tell your doctor what your symptoms are without claiming them as your permanent identity. You can acknowledge what is happening in your body while simultaneously maintaining an inner understanding that it is not the final word. Murphy encouraged people to become conscious of their language, to notice the habitual phrases they used about their health, and to begin, gently but consistently, to shift those phrases in the direction of the truth they were working toward. Instead of, I am always exhausted, begin to say, I am building my energy. Instead of, my condition never improves, begin to say, my body is always moving toward healing. These are not denials. They are redirections. They are new instructions being fed into the system. And over time, with consistency, they change the impression in the subconscious, and the subconscious changes the body. Murphy also had a great deal to say about forgiveness as a dimension of physical healing. And this is something that surprises many people when they first encounter his teaching. But he had observed repeatedly that unresolved resentment, deep-seated grievance, prolonged hostility toward another person, these states do not stay neatly contained in the emotional realm. They percolate down into the body. They create tension in tissues. They suppress immune function. They keep the organism in a state of low-grade emergency that diverts energy away from healing and toward defense. He was clear that forgiveness is not something you do for the other person. It is something you do for yourself. It is the act of releasing your own mind from a burden that is doing you harm. You are not saying that what happened was acceptable. You are not excusing behavior that may have been genuinely damaging. You are simply withdrawing your own energy from the continuous rehearsal of the wound. You are choosing to stop replaying the story that keeps injuring you from the inside. In Murphy's framework, forgiveness is medicine. Literal, physiological medicine. Because the moment you genuinely release a deep resentment, the energy that was bound up in it becomes available again. The nervous system softens. The body begins to move back toward its natural state of ease. And that state of ease is the state in which healing accelerates. This is difficult work. Murphy knew that. He never minimized how hard it can be to release a genuine grievance, especially one rooted in real harm. But he also knew that the person who refuses to forgive, who holds on to their anger as a form of justice, is not actually hurting the one who harmed them. They are hurting themselves, and they are blocking, in a very direct physical way, the very healing they are praying for. There is a passage in Murphy's thinking that I want to draw your attention to, because it speaks to something that runs underneath all of this teaching, something that gives it its real depth and its real power. Murphy believed that the healing power inside you is not a human invention. It is not something you create through technique or will. It is something you align with, something you allow, something that was already there, already active, already oriented toward your wholeness, and that your job is simply to stop blocking it. He would point to the body's constant regenerative activity as evidence of this. Your body is not static. Every cell in your body has a lifespan. Cells die and are replaced continuously. The lining of your digestive tract renews itself in days. Your skin replaces itself in weeks. Your liver regenerates. Even your bones are constantly being broken down and rebuilt. The intelligence overseeing all of this is not something you direct with your conscious mind. It is something far deeper and far more capable than your conscious mind, and it is not indifferent to your condition. It is oriented, fundamentally and inherently, toward life, toward repair, toward function, toward wholeness. Murphy called this the infinite healing presence, the divine intelligence within, and he believed that when you learn to cooperate with it, when you stop feeding it impressions of fear and disease and hopelessness, when you begin feeding it impressions of life and wholeness and gratitude, you are not creating something new. You are aligning with something eternal. You are getting out of the way of something that has wanted to heal you all along. This is the most important shift in perspective that Murphy wanted to create. Not that healing is something you achieve through effort, but that healing is something you allow through alignment. Your body was made to be well. Wholeness is your natural state. Disease, in Murphy's understanding, is a departure from the natural, and every departure from the natural carries within itself the tendency to return. You simply have to provide the right conditions. So let us bring this together. Let us make this practical and clear. The God-given healing power inside you is real. It is not metaphor. It is not wishful thinking. It is the actual intelligence that created your body and continues to govern its every function. It operates through your subconscious mind, which is the medium between your conscious thoughts and your physical reality. To work with this power, you must begin to take seriously what you habitually put into your mind, the images you hold, the words you speak, the emotions you rehearse, the beliefs you have accepted about your body, your health, your worthiness to be well. These are the impressions that shape what your subconscious produces in your physical experience. Begin the practice. Take 10 minutes each night as you are falling asleep. Relax deliberately. Let the body soften. Let the critical mind quiet. And then, with genuine feeling, with the emotional reality of someone who knows it is true, hold in your mind the image of yourself whole, well, and free. Feel the gratitude for a healing that you are choosing to accept as already underway. Do this with consistency, not as a desperate plea, as a calm, knowing cooperation with an intelligence that is already on your side. Watch your language. Begin to notice the habitual ways you talk about your body and your health. Gently, persistently, shift them in the direction of the outcome you are working toward. If there is anyone you need to forgive, begin that work. Not for their sake, for yours. For the sake of the energy you will reclaim and the physical ease that will follow. And above all, begin to build a real relationship with the conviction that there is something inside you, something greater than your conscious personality, greater than your history, greater than your diagnosis, that is already at work on your behalf, that has been at work all along. That will continue to work in proportion to the cooperation you give it. Murphy spent his life bringing this message to as many people as he could reach because he understood what it meant. Not just as philosophy, as liberation, as the practical difference between a life defined by limitation and a life open to the full expression of what you were created to be. You were not created to suffer indefinitely. You were not designed to be broken. The intelligence that assembled you from nothing, that grew you from a single cell into the extraordinary complexity you are, did not run out of power the day you were born. It is still here, it is still capable, and it is already, right now, in this moment, working toward your wholeness. The only question is whether you will believe it enough to get out of its way. There is a story Murphy told more than once in his writing and in his lectures, and it is one worth sitting with, because it illustrates in the most concrete possible way what we have been discussing. A woman came to him in considerable distress. She had been suffering from a painful physical condition for several years. She had seen doctors. She had followed their recommendations. She had done everything that conventional medicine had suggested, and yet the condition persisted. She was not someone who lacked faith in the general sense. She prayed regularly. She attended her church. She believed in God in the way that many people believe, as an abstract presence, benevolent but distant, available perhaps for the great crisis of history, but somehow not quite accessible for the specific ache in her specific body on this specific Tuesday afternoon. And Murphy sat with her and asked her a simple question. He asked her what she believed was actually happening inside her body right now, in this moment. As they spoke, not what the doctors had told her, not what the diagnosis said, but what she, in her deepest self, actually believed was true about the activity inside her physical form. She thought about it honestly, and what she described was essentially a picture of a body at war with itself. A body in which something had gone wrong in a fundamental way. A body that was, at its core, broken. That was the image living inside her. That was the impression her subconscious mind had been receiving day after day, with the full emotional weight of her fear and her discouragement and her exhaustion reinforcing it. Murphy did not argue with her. He did not tell her she was wrong to feel what she felt. He simply began, slowly and carefully, to introduce her to a different picture. He began to describe for her what was actually happening in her body beneath the level of the symptoms. The continuous cellular renewal, the constant effort of her immune intelligence to restore balance, the billions of operations happening every second, all oriented toward life, all working in the direction of function and repair. He described the intelligence behind those operations not as an impersonal biological mechanism, but as the living expression of the same infinite wisdom that had created her in the first place, and that had never for a single moment abandoned its work. He gave her a new image to hold, and he gave her a practice, and several weeks later she wrote to him. The condition had improved in ways her doctor found difficult to account for. She was not yet fully healed. But something had shifted. Something fundamental had changed in the direction things were moving. And Murphy's response, characteristically, was not triumphant. It was quiet. It was almost matter of fact. Of course something had shifted. The law had been applied. The intelligence had been given new instruction. It was simply doing what it always does, responding. This consistency was central to how Murphy understood the healing power. He did not see it as miraculous in the sense of being arbitrary or unpredictable, available on some occasions and absent on others according to some divine whim that human beings could not fathom. He saw it as lawful. He saw it as operating according to principles as consistent and reliable as any law in the physical universe. And this understanding, this movement from seeing healing as a miracle that might or might not be granted to seeing it as a law that could be consciously engaged, was perhaps his most radical and most liberating contribution, because laws can be learned, laws can be worked with. If you understand the law of gravity, you can build an aircraft. You are not defying the law. You are engaging other laws in relationship with it. You are working with the nature of reality rather than simply being subject to it. Murphy believed the same was true of the healing laws of the mind. Once you understood how the subconscious received impressions, once you understood the relationship between belief and biological outcome, between inner image and outer manifestation, you were no longer simply at the mercy of whatever happened to be living in your subconscious from years of accumulated fear and cultural conditioning. You could work with the law deliberately. You could become, in his phrase, a conscious co-operator with the infinite healing presence within you. This is what distinguishes Murphy's approach from mere positive thinking. Positive thinking, as it is popularly understood, is a kind of surface-level optimism. Think good thoughts and good things will happen. Murphy was describing something far more specific and far more substantial. He was describing a precise understanding of how the human mind is structured, how the subconscious processes impressions, and what specific conditions must be present for those impressions to take root deeply enough to produce physical change. The conditions, as we have discussed, involve feeling genuine emotional reality, not performed cheerfulness. They involve repetition, the consistent feeding of the new impression until it establishes itself as the dominant belief. They involve relaxation, particularly the deeply receptive state at the threshold of sleep, and they involve, above all, the bedrock conviction that the power is real, that it is present, that it is already at work, and that your cooperation is not a gamble, but a certainty. Murphy frequently returned to the ancient texts to ground his teaching in something deeper than his own experience or observation. He was a student of the Bible in a way that most conventional religious readers are not, reading it not as historical narrative, but as a psychological document, a map of the human mind and its relationship to the infinite. And throughout that text, in tradition after tradition, in wisdom literature from every corner of the ancient world, he found the same teaching recurring with unmistakable consistency. The kingdom is within you. The healer is already present. The source of renewal is not something you must travel to find. It is closer than your own breath. It is the life that is already animating you. In the gospel accounts that Murphy studied deeply, the healing stories followed a pattern that he found profoundly instructive. Again and again, what preceded the physical healing was a shift in the person's inner state, a movement from doubt to certainty, a moment in which something in the person's belief structure changed, sometimes dramatically, sometimes quietly, and the body followed. The teacher in those accounts was not performing a magic trick from outside. He was activating something that was already present within the person. He was restoring their contact with the healing intelligence that had never actually left them, and his words to those who were healed were not, "I have fixed you." They were, "Your faith has made you whole." The agency, in every case, was located within the person themselves. Murphy found this endlessly significant, not because he wanted to diminish what was described in those accounts, but because he wanted people to understand that what was described, there was not a one-time historical exception to the normal rules of reality. It was a demonstration of principles that are always in operation, always available, always responsive to the conditions of belief and inner alignment that activate them. Your faith has made you whole. Not faith as a vague, warm feeling toward a distant God. Faith as a specific, settled, deeply held inner conviction that the power is real and that it is working. Faith as the choice, and it is ultimately a choice, to hold the image of wholeness with more emotional force and more consistency than you hold the image of disease. Faith is the decision to give your subconscious mind instructions for healing rather than instructions for suffering. Let us talk for a moment about what happens when the practice seems not to be working. Because this is a real experience that many people have, and it deserves a direct and honest response. You begin the work. You do the visualizations. You speak the affirmations. You make genuine efforts to shift your belief, and yet the condition persists. The symptoms are still there. Maybe weeks have passed, or even months, and nothing seems to have changed. What then? Murphy addressed this with great care, because he knew it was the point at which most people gave up, and in giving up, cut off the very process they had begun. The first thing he would say is this: you cannot see what is happening beneath the surface. The healing intelligence of the subconscious does not issue progress reports. It does not send you weekly updates on the adjustments being made at the cellular level, on the changes occurring in your biochemistry, on the subtle shifts in your nervous system that are preceding the physical change you will eventually be able to observe. The work is happening before you can see it, and the moment you look at the absence of visible results and conclude that nothing is working, you introduce a new and powerful impression, the impression of failure, and you begin to undo what has been building. Murphy used the analogy of planting a seed. When you plant a seed in the ground, you do not dig it up after a week to see if it is growing. You do not look at the undisturbed soil and conclude that nothing is happening. You know that beneath the surface, in the dark, in the quiet, processes are underway that will in their own time produce exactly what the seed was designed to produce. Your job is to maintain the conditions, to water the ground, to keep the soil clear of weeds, and to trust the intelligence of the seed and the soil to do what they were made to do. Healing often works exactly this way. There is an incubation period, There is a process occurring beneath the surface that precedes the visible result. And the person who can hold their inner image steady through that apparently quiet period, who can maintain their conviction without requiring immediate visible confirmation, is the person in whom the seed eventually breaks through into the light. This does not mean ignoring symptoms that require medical attention. Murphy was always clear that the inner work and the outer practical steps are not mutually exclusive. If you are in pain, you address the pain. If a doctor's care is available and appropriate, you receive it. But you do so while simultaneously maintaining the inner practice, holding the image of wholeness, feeding the subconscious the impression of health. You allow both levels of care to work together, because the inner work does not replace practical wisdom. It works alongside it, amplifying it, creating conditions in which the body can respond more fully to whatever help it is receiving. There is a dimension of this teaching that Murphy was passionate about and that deserves its own careful attention. It is the dimension of self-worth, of what you believe you deserve. Murphy encountered many people in his work, people who understood the theory, who performed the practices, who said all the right words, and yet who, somewhere in the foundation of their inner life, did not believe they were worthy of healing. They had absorbed, from childhood, from religion, from painful experience, a deep conviction that suffering was somehow appropriate for them, that they had done something to deserve their condition, that asking for healing was presumptuous, that God or life or the universe had reasons for keeping them as they were, and who were they to ask for something different? This is one of the most destructive beliefs a person can carry, and Murphy addressed it with unusual intensity. Because the healing power inside you is not a reward for good behavior. It is not something you earn through suffering or deserve through virtue. It is your inheritance by nature of being alive. It is built into the structure of what you are. The same intelligence that beats your heart without asking whether you have been good enough does not require a moral audit before it repairs tissue or restores function. The infinite intelligence within you does not hold grievances. It does not remember your failures and factor them into its willingness to heal you. It is, in its fundamental nature, unconditional. It moves toward life, always, in everyone, without exception. The only thing that modifies its expression in your particular experience is what you are putting into the system through your habitual thoughts, beliefs, and emotional states. So if somewhere in your foundation there is the belief that you do not deserve to be well, that is the belief that must be addressed, not through argument, not by trying to convince yourself intellectually, but by finding in the quiet of your practice a genuine contact with the reality that you are not your history. You are not your mistakes. You are not the verdict that fear or shame or other people's cruelty has pronounced over you. You are an expression of infinite life. An infinite life is not interested in withholding itself from its own expressions. Murphy would sometimes have people simply sit in silence and allow themselves to feel, genuinely feel, not just think, that they were loved, that they were worthy of wholeness, that the power inside them was not indifferent to their suffering, but was actively, persistently, relentlessly working in their favor. This sounds simple. It is not always simple. For many people it is the hardest work of all. But it is foundational, and without it, all the technique in the world produces results that are partial at best. As we come toward the close of this, I want to leave you with something that Murphy himself would often return to at the end of his lectures and his writings. Something he clearly felt was the heart of everything he had spent his life teaching. He would say, "The infinite healing presence within you is not something you need to beg. It is not something you need to convince or negotiate with or earn. It is something you need only accept. The door is already open. The power is already active. The intelligence is already oriented toward your wholeness. What is required of you is not great effort. What is required is a willingness to receive. This willingness is not passive. It is not lying down and waiting. It is the active, practiced, consistent choice to orient your inner life, your thoughts, your feelings, your words, your beliefs in alignment with the truth that you are already held by something that wants you well. That created you for wholeness. That has never stopped working toward that wholeness, regardless of what your symptoms say or what your fears insist or what any voice inside or outside of you has declared about your limitations. Murphy's entire life was a testimony to this truth. He came from a background of his own struggles and his own searching. He did not arrive at this teaching from a position of ease and comfort. He arrived at it through the same path that most of us travel, through difficulty, through doubt, through the honest confrontation with what is actually possible when a human being genuinely engages the power that lives within them. And what he found, what he devoted his life to communicating, was this: you are not alone in your body. You have never been alone in your body. There is an intelligence within you that is ancient and capable and tireless and already, in this moment, working on your behalf. It does not need your permission to exist. It needs only your cooperation to fully express, learn its nature. Feed it well. Give it images of life and wholeness to work toward. Remove the obstructions of fear and resentment and unworthiness that you may have unknowingly placed in its path. And then, with the deepest trust you can bring to this moment, allow it to do what it was created to do. The healing power is not coming. It is not waiting for some future moment when conditions are finally right. It is here. It is now. It is already within you. It always has been. There is something that happens when a person truly internalizes this teaching, not as information they have processed and filed away, but as a living reality they have genuinely contacted, and it is worth describing carefully because it is different from what most people expect. Most people come to teachings like this expecting a feeling of effort. They expect that working with the healing power within them will feel like straining toward something just out of reach, like pushing against resistance, like the exhausting work of trying to believe something their experience seems to constantly contradict. And when that is how it feels, they often conclude that they are doing it wrong, or that the teaching doesn't work for them specifically, or that they lack whatever special quality is required to make it real. But Murphy described something quite different. He described the genuine experience of this work, when it is actually landing, when it is actually taking root, as a feeling of relief, of coming home, of something releasing rather than something being achieved. Because what you are doing when you genuinely align with the healing intelligence within you is not adding something foreign to your experience. You are removing the obstruction to something that was always naturally there. And the natural experience of removing an obstruction is not effort, it is ease. It is the quiet, unmistakable sense that something has returned to its proper place. This is the feeling to look for, not the strained intensity of someone trying very hard to believe something difficult, but the soft, settling quality of someone who has stopped fighting the current and allowed themselves to be carried by it. That softening, that release, that return to ease, that is the signal that the deeper mind has received the impression. That is the sign that the seed has gone into the ground. Murphy understood that we live in a culture that has enormous difficulty with this. We are trained from childhood to believe that results require struggle, that worthwhile things are hard-won, that ease is somehow suspicious, a sign that you are not working hard enough or taking things seriously enough. This cultural conditioning runs very deep, and it creates a particular kind of problem when people approach inner healing work. They work so hard at it that the effort itself becomes a signal to the subconscious that the thing they want is far away and difficult to reach. The straining communicates lack. The desperate intensity communicates that healing is not yet present. And the subconscious, faithfully reading the emotional content of the message, continues to produce the experience of lack and absence. This is why Murphy emphasized so strongly the importance of moving into the relaxed state before doing inner work. Not as a mere technique for comfort, but as a psychological necessity. The relaxed state quiets the part of you that doubts and strains and effortfully pushes. It creates the conditions in which the subconscious can receive impressions cleanly without the interference of the anxious conscious mind layering its fears and qualifications over everything. When you are genuinely relaxed, when the body is soft and the mind is quiet, and you hold in that space an image of wholeness with the simple, natural warmth of gratitude, you are not pushing, you are planting, you are not demanding, you are accepting. And the difference between those two postures, in terms of what they communicate to the subconscious mind, is the difference between reinforcing the problem and beginning to dissolve it. Let us speak about something that Murphy returned to with particular frequency, the relationship between sleep and healing, because this is an area where most people are unknowingly either accelerating their recovery or systematically undermining it, and they have no idea which one they are doing. Every night, as you move into sleep, you pass through that threshold state we have already discussed. The hypnagogic state, the drowsy borderland between waking and sleeping, and then sleep itself comes. And during sleep, the conscious mind withdraws. The critical faculty goes quiet. The analytical, doubting, evaluating part of you that spends its waking hours questioning and worrying and guessing is temporarily suspended. And the subconscious mind operates without interference. This is the time of the deepest healing. This is when the body performs its most significant repair work. The processes of cellular regeneration accelerate during sleep. The immune system is most active. The nervous system integrates and restores. Sleep is not a passive absence of activity. It is the body's primary healing period. And what you bring into that period, what you carry across the threshold of consciousness into that deeply receptive state, has an extraordinary influence on what the subconscious does with the hours of darkness. Murphy was very direct about this. The last thought held in your mind before sleep is the thought that most deeply imprints on the subconscious. The last image, the last feeling, the last inner statement you make as waking consciousness releases its hold. That is what the subconscious takes with it into the night. That is the instruction it works with through the hours you are unaware. For most people, what crosses that threshold is worry, the rehearsal of tomorrow's anxieties, the replay of today's frustrations, the mental cataloguing of symptoms, of pains, of fears about what a condition might mean or where it might lead. All of that crosses into sleep with full emotional weight. And the subconscious, receiving those impressions in the most receptive state it ever enters, works with them through the night. And you wake in the morning having spent 8 hours receiving instruction in the direction of what you feared rather than what you hoped for. Murphy wanted to change this completely. He wanted people to understand that the approach to sleep is one of the most powerful healing opportunities available to them. And he gave a very specific recommendation. In the minutes before sleep, in that soft and drowsy state, speak inwardly to the healing intelligence within you, not with desperation, not with urgency, with the quiet familiarity of someone speaking to a trusted presence that has always been there. Something like this: the infinite healing presence within me is now restoring every cell, every tissue, every organ of my body to perfect wholeness. I give thanks for this healing which is already underway. All is well. The specific words matter less than the feeling behind them. What matters is that you cross the threshold of sleep carrying an impression of wholeness, of healing already in motion, of deep and genuine gratitude for a restoration that you have chosen to accept as real. And the subconscious, faithful and tireless, works with that impression through the night. Morning after morning of waking from that kind of sleep, you are a different person than you were. Not because something magical happened from outside, because the most powerful healing system in the known universe was given clear and consistent instructions and did exactly what it was designed to do. Murphy also spoke at length about the role of what he called the healing word, the specific spoken or internally voiced statement used with intention as a vehicle for impressing the subconscious mind. This practice has ancient roots. Every tradition that has ever worked seriously with the mind-body relationship has understood that words carry vibrational and psychological power that goes beyond their literal meaning. The sound of a word, the meaning it carries, the emotional associations it evokes. These things have effects in the nervous system and by extension in the body. Murphy was not mystical about this. He explained it in straightforward psychological terms. A word that carries strong positive emotional associations, when spoken with genuine feeling and clear intention in a relaxed and receptive state, functions as a direct communication to the subconscious. It is shorthand for an entire constellation of impressions. It bypasses the lengthy visualization and delivers the emotional core of the message with efficiency and force. He encouraged people to find their own healing words. For some people, the word was wholeness. For others, life. For others, perfection, in the sense of the body returning to its designed state of perfect function. For those with a strong religious orientation, the simple word God, spoken inwardly with genuine feeling, carried the full weight of their belief in an infinite healing presence and delivered it as a single concentrated impression to the subconscious. The practice he sometimes suggested was simply to lie in a relaxed state and repeat the chosen word slowly and gently, allowing it to sink rather than forcing it down, not chanting it mechanically, but letting each repetition carry genuine feeling, genuine contact with what the word represents, letting it become less a word and more a felt reality. This, he said, was one of the simplest and most powerful forms of inner healing work available to anyone, regardless of their circumstances, their education, their background, or the severity of their condition. We should speak about the body's wisdom directly, because it is something Murphy referenced, but which deserves fuller exploration. Your body is not a passive vessel. It is not simply matter that the mind acts upon from a position of superiority. It is itself intelligent. It is itself a form of wisdom that we have in many ways forgotten how to listen to. Long before a condition becomes serious enough to produce obvious symptoms, the body has been communicating. There is fatigue that is trying to say something about rest. There is tension held in specific places that is trying to say something about unprocessed experience. There are patterns of physical response, the tightening in the chest, the knot in the stomach, the chronic pain in the back, or the neck, that are not arbitrary. They are the body's attempt to communicate in the only language available to it when the mind is not listening. Murphy understood that one dimension of working with the healing intelligence within is learning to listen to the body with respect and attention rather than treating it as an inconvenient machine that has malfunctioned. When you bring genuine inner quiet, the kind of quiet that the practices he recommended can cultivate, you begin to notice these communications. And sometimes what the body is trying to say is very specific. Sometimes there is a pattern of thought or behavior, a relationship that is draining your life force, a belief you are carrying that is costing you enormous energy, a grief you have not allowed yourself to feel, a truth about your life that you have been avoiding. This does not mean that all physical illness is psychosomatic in the simplistic sense of being imaginary or self-inflicted. Murphy was careful about this. The body has its own physical reality, and its conditions deserve to be addressed on that level as well. But it does mean that the body is always part of a larger system. It does not exist in isolation from the mind that inhabits it and the emotional life that flows through it. And attending to the whole system, listening to what the body is saying, as well as giving it new instructions through the healing practices, is a more complete approach than either one alone. There is a quality that Murphy observed in the people whose healing was most dramatic and most lasting, a quality that, once you notice it described, you begin to recognize it as something distinct from ordinary positive thinking or ordinary religious faith. He called it by different names at different times. Sometimes he called it inner knowing. Sometimes he called it the conviction of things not yet seen. Sometimes he simply called it certainty. It is the quality of a person who has, at some level below the rational, actually crossed a threshold of belief, who has moved from hoping something is true to knowing it is true in the same way they know that the sun will rise tomorrow, not with white-knuckled intensity, with a settled, almost casual certainty that the healing intelligence is real, that it is active, and that it is working. with the kind of untroubled confidence that doesn't need to keep checking for results, because it simply knows they are coming. This quality cannot be manufactured by will. It is not something you can decide to have and then have it, but it can be cultivated. It is the natural fruit of consistent practice, of deepening understanding, of accumulating inner evidence that the power is real. Every small shift you notice in your condition, every morning you wake feeling slightly more alive, every moment in which the pain is a little less present, these are not coincidences to be explained away. They are data points. They are evidence. They are the system responding to the new instructions you are giving it. Collect this evidence. Note it. Let it build the foundation of your certainty, because certainty, once established, becomes its own most powerful impression on the subconscious. The person who is certain of their healing carries that certainty into every moment, reinforcing it with every breath, and the subconscious, reading that settled, unquestioned conviction, responds with all the power it has. Murphy's teaching ultimately rests on a vision of what a human being actually is. And it is worth stating that vision clearly, because it is different from what most of us have been taught, and because understanding it changes everything. You are not a physical body that happens to have a mind. You are an expression of infinite intelligence that has taken physical form. The intelligence came first, the body followed, and that intelligence, the same intelligence that governs the movement of galaxies and the unfolding of a seed into a flower and the development of a single fertilized cell into the staggering complexity of a human being, is not somewhere else. It is the ground of your existence. It is what you are made of. It is what you are. When you are sick, you have not been abandoned by this intelligence. You have not been cut off from it. It is still present, still active, still moving toward your wholeness with a persistence that does not tire and a wisdom that does not fail. What has happened, in Murphy's understanding, is that somewhere in the layers of your mental and emotional life, there are impressions that are working against the natural direction of that intelligence. Patterns of fear, of belief in limitation, of identification with disease, of unresolved emotion. These are not evil. They are simply misdirections. They are the accumulated deposits of a life lived, as most lives are lived, without awareness of how the inner system operates. And they can be changed. That is the extraordinary good news at the center of everything Murphy taught. They can be changed. Not by force, not by punishment, not by condemning yourself for having them, by the gentle, persistent, consistent introduction of new impressions, by the patient, loving, faithful work of feeding a new picture to the infinite intelligence within you until that new picture becomes the dominant reality. This is your inheritance. This is your birthright. This is the power that was placed inside you before you drew your first breath, and that will remain inside you until your last. It does not require your worthiness. It does not require your perfection. It requires only your willingness, your genuine, growing, deepening willingness to work with it rather than against it, to align with it rather than obstruct it, to receive what it has been trying to give you all along. The God-given healing power inside you is not a promise for another time or another person or another set of circumstances. It is a present reality. It is here. It is you, and the life that is possible when you finally, fully, completely accept that truth is a life that, right now, you may not yet be able to imagine, but the intelligence inside you can, and it is already at work. 17 p.m. There is a moment that comes in the life of nearly every person who has genuinely engaged this teaching, a moment that is quiet, almost undramatic from the outside, but that carries the weight of something fundamental shifting. It does not always arrive with fanfare. It does not always come at the end of a long meditation or in the middle of a powerful spiritual experience. Sometimes it comes in the most ordinary of moments, standing at a window in the early morning, sitting with a cup of tea, walking slowly through a familiar place, and in that moment something settles. Something that had been braced and guarded and held tight for perhaps years, perhaps decades, simply releases. And in that release there is a recognition, not a thought exactly, but a direct inner knowing that everything is going to be all right. Not because the circumstances have changed. Not because the symptoms have disappeared or the diagnosis has been reversed or the external situation has resolved itself, but because something has changed at a level deeper than any of those things. Because contact has been made with the reality that was always there, waiting beneath the noise and the fear and the struggle. The reality that you are held, that you have always been held, that the power working within you has never once failed in its fundamental orientation toward your life. Murphy believed this moment was available to everyone, not as a distant spiritual achievement reserved for the especially devoted or the especially gifted, as a natural consequence of doing the work, of consistently, patiently, faithfully turning the attention inward and feeding the deeper mind with truth rather than with fear. He believed that the recognition was inevitable for anyone who persisted, because the truth does not have to be created. It only has to be uncovered, and the uncovering, however long it takes, however many layers must be gently moved aside, is always ultimately successful. Because what you are uncovering is not fragile, it is not uncertain, it is the most substantial thing in your existence. It is the ground beneath every experience you have ever had, the life within every breath you have ever taken, the intelligence within every heartbeat that has ever moved through your chest. One of the questions Murphy was asked more than perhaps any other, in letters and in person and in the question periods after his lectures, was this: what about the people who do the work and still do not recover? What about those whose conditions persist or worsen despite genuine practice and genuine faith? What does this teaching say to them? Murphy never deflected this question. He never wrapped it in comfortable theology or dismissed it with easy reassurance. He sat with it honestly, because he knew that honest engagement with difficulty is more respectful and more genuinely helpful than any amount of spiritual bypassing. His answer was layered. He would say first that we can never fully see into the interior life of another person. We cannot know what impressions are living at the deepest layers of their subconscious. We cannot know what beliefs are operating below the level of their conscious awareness, counteracting the work they are doing at the surface. The healing of deep, long-held impressions is not always a quick process. The layers that have accumulated over a lifetime do not always dissolve in weeks or months. This is not a failure of the power. It is simply the reality of how the system works. A garden that has been neglected for 20 years does not transform in a single season of tending. He would say, second, that healing is not always physical. This is perhaps the most difficult thing, he said, and also in some ways the most profound. There are forms of wholeness that transcend the physical body. There are people whose inner life transforms so completely through this work, whose fear dissolves, whose peace deepens, whose love expands, whose experience of being alive becomes so genuinely rich and full, that the question of physical symptoms becomes secondary in a way that is not denial and not resignation, but something that can only be described as genuine transcendence. Murphy had encountered such people. He spoke of them with deep respect, because they had found something that most people spend their entire lives searching for and never locate, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a wholeness that the condition of the body cannot touch. And he would say third, with the humility that characterized his best moments, that there are things he did not fully understand, that the relationship between the infinite intelligence and the individual life is not a simple equation that human wisdom can completely map, that there is mystery here, real mystery. Not the mystery of ignorance, not the mystery of a teaching that is hiding its failures behind vagueness, but the genuine mystery of a reality that is larger than any framework built to describe it. He held that mystery with respect rather than anxiety, because in his experience, the mystery was not threatening. It was simply the horizon of a reality whose depth he had spent his life exploring and had never once found the bottom of. What Murphy wanted, more than anything, was for people to stop living as though the healing power were somewhere else. This was the wound he saw again and again in the people who came to him. Not the physical wound, not the medical condition, not the diagnosis, the prior wound, the deeper wound, the wound of disconnection from their own inner life, the terrible, unnecessary loneliness of a person who believes they are entirely on their own inside their own skin, who faces their suffering with only the resources of their conscious, rational, worried mind, who has never been told, or who has been told and never truly believed, that there is something inside them that is not worried, that is not overwhelmed, that is not uncertain about the outcome, that knows, with the complete calm of intelligence that has been doing this work since before the first cell of their body was formed, exactly what is needed and exactly how to provide it. This disconnection is the source of so much unnecessary suffering. Not the suffering of the condition itself, which is real and deserves compassion and practical care, but the additional suffering of facing it alone, the exhausting, relentless anxiety of believing that your only resources are your own frightened conscious mind and whatever help you can find outside of you, when the most powerful resource available to you is not outside at all, when it is closer than your own heartbeat, when it is, in the most literal sense possible, the very life that is animating you in this moment. Murphy wanted to close that gap. That was his mission. That was the thread running through every book he wrote, every lecture he gave, every person he counseled, to help people close the gap between who they thought they were, isolated, limited, vulnerable, alone, and what they actually were, expressions of infinite life, carriers of infinite intelligence, vessels of a healing power so vast and so capable that no condition it faces is beyond its competence. No damage it encounters is beyond its capacity to restore, no darkness it enters is beyond its power to illuminate. So here is what I want to leave you with, not as a conclusion, because this is not the kind of teaching that concludes, it opens. It begins something that, if you let it, will continue to deepen and expand for the rest of your life. But as a beginning, as the first step of a journey that is already underway, whether you have recognized it or not. Tonight, before you sleep, take a few minutes, not to worry, not to plan, not to rehearse your symptoms or calculate your fears. Take a few minutes to be still. Let the body relax, let the breath slow, let the noise of the day settle to the bottom like sediment in water that has finally been allowed to stand. And in that stillness, in that quiet, turn your attention inward, not outward to the circumstances, not backward to the history of your condition, not forward to the anxiety of what might come, inward, to the life that is here right now, to the breath that is moving without your effort, to the heartbeat that has never once asked your permission and has never once failed you, to the intelligence behind all of that, ancient, tireless, present, capable, and speak to it, in whatever words feel most true to you, in whatever language feels most natural in the privacy of your own inner life. Tell it that you are ready to work with it rather than against it, that you are choosing in this moment to believe in its presence and its power, that you are giving it, consciously and deliberately, the image of yourself whole, well, free, fully alive, fully functioning, fully expressing the life that it was always trying to bring through you. And then rest in that. Don't grip it. Don't strain. Don't immediately begin checking to see if it is working. Simply plant the seed and trust the intelligence of the soil. Sleep with that image. Wake with that image. Carry it through your day not as an anxious mantra you are repeating to ward off fear, but as a quiet background certainty, a settled inner knowing that the work is underway, that the power is real, that the intelligence within you has received its new instruction and is, right now, in ways you cannot see and do not need to see, moving in the direction of your healing. Do this tomorrow night, and the night after, and the night after that. Not because you are desperate, because you are committed, because you have decided, perhaps for the first time with full awareness, to be a conscious participant in your own life rather than a passive recipient of whatever your accumulated unconscious impressions have been producing. This is what Joseph Murphy gave his life to teaching, not a philosophy, not a theology, not a self-help system, a practice, a living, daily, utterly personal practice of working with the most extraordinary power in the known universe, the power that is already inside you, That has always been inside you, that was placed there before your first breath by an intelligence whose only orientation is toward your life, your wholeness, your flourishing. You do not have to earn it. You do not have to be worthy of it. You do not have to understand it completely before you can work with it. You only have to turn toward it, acknowledge it, feed it with truth, and allow it, finally fully with the whole weight of your trust, to do what it was always made to do. Heal you completely. From the inside out, that power is not coming. It is not waiting. It is not withheld. It is here. It is now. It is the life within your life, the intelligence behind your every breath, the love at the center of your existence. It has always been there. And it has always known the way home.